What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video, I want to discuss some of the unexpected wounds and emotions and, a more encompassing term, energies that surprised the shit out of me that needed healing on my healing and spiritual awakening journey. I'm gonna get right into it. I'll be honest, I've already recorded this once and I'm not entirely sure, or attempted to record it once. I'm not entirely sure how this is all gonna flow. This is gonna be more of a vulnerable, raw video where I just share my experiences, no filters, no expectations. I'm not gonna attempt to be to sound intellectually correct in any regard, whether it's through a spiritual or a psychological lens. I'm just going to share what is the truth of my experiences. So the first one, get right into it. The first one is healing unprocessed joy. The first unexpected energy that needed healing within my being when I began this journey was processing joyfully, or healing the unprocessed joy. And now I'm going to share this in my own words without any type of psychological or spiritual jargon to help fluff it out at all. When I started to realize this, I'm like, holy shit, this is joy coming to the surface from an old experience. And I had the opportunity to reflect on this the other day, and I can actually put this into words as to what I was doing psychologically and energetically. And it's intellectually, it's very fascinating to me, but it's just wildly surprising that this was actually what was happening within me. So in my mid and early 20s, I went to a lot of music festivals. I love house music, dance music, EDM, whatever you want to call it. Thoroughly enjoy it. And at these music festivals, there's a lot of fun being had, a lot of joy expressed. But what I didn't realize was I didn't actually process it fully. So in other words, I didn't allow myself to feel all of the joy. And what I did psychologically was I held on to those joyful moments, to those memories, because deep down, I didn't think I was worthy of experiencing the depth of it and then experiencing it, or that I was going to experience it again. I didn't believe that I was worthy of experiencing the depth of it. Or maybe even another way to phrase it is I wasn't capable of it at the time. But that, and the second one was I didn't feel like I was going to experience that again. I didn't feel like I was worthy to experience that again. So psychologically, I held on to that experience and never allowed the energy to fully run its course. And then I would have regrets about it all. And this kept this cycle alive where I would use regret to then work really hard and do all of these things, improve myself to get back to the joyful moment, and then never fully experience it. And again, intellectually, it is very fascinating to me because this is the work I do from a career standpoint, but it is just also wildly surprising that my psyche did that. Like, I didn't believe I was worthy of experiencing joy again, so I held on to the memory rather than experience it and cherish the memory and then go do it again. And it's crazy. The second one is healing enmeshment. So this is kind of where psychological jargon may come into play a little bit, but for anybody who's unfamiliar with enmeshment, enmeshment is essentially when, in adolescence, when we're growing up, the psychological boundaries or the energetic boundaries between you and your caretaker, your parent, your family, whomever it is, it's most likely going to be a caretaker, a parent, thing of that sort, is substantially blurred. And so you have a hard time differentiating yourself versus them. And so you may take on their emotions, their energy as your problem to bear. And what that creates is this dynamic where you may feel mom's sadness and dad's anger, and it may come out of nowhere. And because children, for the most part, just absorb energy, or maybe not just absorb energy, but they're raw emotional. They're experiencing life through emotional experiences predominantly. They just take on those emotions, and then I have to fix mom, then I have to fix dad, or whatever it is. And this is really where like people pleasing and nice guy syndrome can really come to the surface and be born early in adolescence. And so it was rather surprising to me to learn about this, and then when I learned about it, it almost lifted a veil within my psyche that I'm like, holy shit, that's exactly what's happening right now. I mean, I would be at work and I would just feel like a wave of frustration. And I'd be like, where did that come from? And lo and behold, it was me picking up on somebody else's energy. And this was surprising to me because I always felt deep down that I had an intuitive sense to pick up on other people's energy. But I didn't realize how much I unconsciously and habitually, habitually absorbed other people's energy and took their problems on as my own. So then I just started trying to fix everyone's problems and all the shit, like make this person happy, make this person laugh. And meanwhile, this was furthering my abandonment wound and perpetuating it, keeping it alive by self-abandonment. And watching that relationship between the two unfold within my own psyche was just crazy, because it's like, okay, at the core I could understand what an abandonment mood is, like somebody abandoned you, maybe a person, your partner leaves you, your parents leave you, or whatever it is. But like I'm sitting here doing it to myself and understanding, like learning about those wounds intellectually led to me like really understanding that these wounds aren't always created from physical disappearances. In other words, it's like your dad or your mom leaves you when you're 2 years old. It's very clear why you have an abandonment wound. But if your parents aren't emotionally capable to hold space for you, or in other words, your parents aren't emotionally available, it can also create an abandonment wound, and by association, this enmeshment wound where mom and dad have emotional baggage they haven't dealt with. So child wants love, so they cater to mom and dad's needs, where the roles are essentially reversed. And instead of them catering to your emotional needs, the roles are flipped. And now you are not only creating an abandonment wound through lack of emotional emotional caretaking, but instead, for a lack of emotional caretaking. So the roles are flipped. In other words, I'm kind of confusing myself with all this jargon here. So, like, learning that, it actually gave me permission to validate so many the emotional experiences and my own truth that I had a hard time validating when I was younger. Which this will kind of tie into the next one, which was my father wound. None of this is an attack on my family or my parents or anybody for that regard, because my family, they're all lovely people. But the father wound was insanely surprising to me, not because it was there, but because of how deep it went. It was like, I wasn't necessarily surprised by the fact that I had a father wound, right? An active one, if that, but it was where it was residing within my psyche or within my energy field. Because on the surface, my dad's a really nice guy. And I say that both because he's a genuinely kind man, but he also has that type of mask where he's a nice guy. He keeps the peace. He doesn't ruffle anybody's feathers, anything of that sort. I mean, he's a salesman, so he's got a charisma to him. And when I started to learn about this stuff, I was like, wow, there might be something deeper here. And it's still sometimes, I find it challenging for me to validate the emotional experiences that are triggered by my father wound, because on the surface, my father's always been a nice dude. And that was the really shocking part. And it's still shocking to me because reparenting myself in the dark when it's so unclear on what I'm attempting to reparent is where the surprise comes in. Because it's like I might be like reparenting myself what feels right in the moment, but it's just like I'm actually being a dick to myself, you know? I'm not practicing self-love, I'm just being a dick. And this is going to tie into my mother wound a little bit, because it's not my mother wound was always on the surface to me. Like I could always see it. Other people even saw how obvious it was that I had internal turmoil in regards to my relationship with my mom. But the way that these two wounds coexisted within my psyche was, it was kind of mind-blowing when I first realized it, because it was like if my mother wound was triggered, it would activate my father wound, and vice versa. So like there was this push-pull. It's just like the balancing of the masculine and feminine energies within you, right? Like when one of those wounds is triggered, at least in my experience, it was both of those wounds were triggered. And so like I would feel sadness, but my father wound would kick in and be like, shut the fuck up. So it was like toxic masculinity meets an overly emotional woman, but inside of me. And experiencing all of that, man, I gotta tell you, I can't tell you how many times I thought I was crazy. Like dead ass. I thought I was crazy. And even to this day, I've never heard a podcast, I've never listened to a book or read a book, learned any information that has given me an insight to somebody else's experience that has even come remotely close to how insane it appears to me at the first glance of recognizing these wounds within me. I don't know if it's all going to make sense, because it's not really making sense in my own mind. And this isn't one of the wounds or emotions or anything like that I had a plan to share, but I'm just going to add this in as bonus. But learning that it was okay for things not to make sense. Growing up, like everything, I always had to have a story ready for everything. And cultivating the spaciousness within me for me not to make sense of something yet, especially when it's something when I say it, is still something new to me. And it's something that comes across in my work all the time, because sometimes like I'm creating a piece of content or sharing information, and something comes out of my mouth and I'm like, whoa, that just felt so profoundly deep that I don't even understand what I just said yet. And it's both cool, and I'm just like, but I feel like I sound like a fucking idiot though? You know what I mean? So anyway, the last one is, actually there's two more. I have a list written behind the camera. So the next one is receiving love. This one actually was really, really shocking to me. I guess when I think about it more, it isn't all that shocking, but when it first hit me, it was. I still remember it because it was the first time I journeyed with psilocybin, magic mushrooms, and it was taking a little bit for it to kick in. So I decided to go to this nature trail nearby, and while I'm out there, it hit me. It wasn't like a crazy euphoric experience, but it was just enough. It was just enough. Let me just put it that way. Where I could drive my car and I wasn't incapacitated. Is the right word, I think. But so this was back in 2023, and nearly 10 years after the first love of my life, the relationship with that woman ended. I'm getting emotional thinking about it. I hit a wave of love hit me. It's like the mushrooms activated the, what do you call it? What's that hormone called? The serotonin within me. And I just felt this wave of love rush into my system. And what came into my mind was, wow, that woman really loved me. And this again, 10 years later after we broke up, I I guess, no, I not guess, I know. It took me that long to process the relationship. And even today, like even last night, she showed up in my mind because this woman was not only the first love of my life, it genuinely feels like she was one of potentially many soulmates that I have, because I am a believer that we don't just have one soulmate, we have many, and they don't have to be romantic partners, they can be a variety of people. So it could be a dog, which I do think my family dog is one. So anyway, I digress on that point, but receiving love, and like that was the first experience, and it still surprises me to this day when I resist people loving me. It still surprises me to this day when I come against resistance to other people loving me. Now I have my own preferred love language that helps me feel how much somebody does love me, but not everybody understands that. And then learning how other people express love and their affection towards me has been a very unique healing experience, and it still shocks me to this day when I come up against the resistance to someone loving me. The last one is going to be like a twofold one, and that is healing the suppressed shame that I have carried around. This one is interesting because I've shared a little bit about this before, but I had this story. The general premise of the story was I was broken and that I was never going to be good enough. So my mind would literally come up with any and every type of story from any and every type of situation to prove how unworthy and broken I was. I mean, even today something happened, and I just listened as my mind was starting to find all of these reasons to prove how broken I was and how unworthy I was. And I'm like, whoa, I mean, it still shocks me. I mean, there's a statistic that I heard a while back that we think 60 to 70,000 thoughts in one day. And, it's like the more and more consciousness I tap into and the more and more awakened I become, the more I'm really genuinely curious how many negative, self-defeating thoughts I used to have, and not to shame them, but again, there's an intellectual part of me that is just deeply intrigued and would love to study myself. And then there's another part of me, it's like, damn, dude, like the compassion side of me is like, yo, I'm sorry you had to deal with that. And yeah, that's it. Like, I see you, And the last thing I'll hit on that ties with the shame is anger. I feel like this is well known enough that people correlate like explosive or uncontrolled anger with men a lot of the time, and repressed emotions. But what surprised me was how many of my emotions were being covered up by anger, and not even just that were covered up, but that the anger wasn't inherently something that was bad. Now, from the outside looking in, or if you're interacting with me and I'm being a dick because I'm angry, yeah, I mean, I totally see why people would label that as bad or unproductive or whatever. But like from an intrinsic viewpoint, it's like the anger was merely a psychological protector created to keep my emotional wound safe. So, I mean, I like to use parts work from IFS. It's a psychological framework developed by Richard Schwartz, I think his name is, and essentially it breaks the psyche up into all these different parts where, it's not like your mind and the way you think isn't just Tyler Egan. Like there's the encompassing Tyler Egan, but all my psyche has different parts. So there's the protectors, which for me a lot of the time was anger. Like the anger was protecting the exiled portions or the repressed emotions. And these repressed emotions were like my shame, this sadness. And I had this part that I identified within myself that was an exiled part that was the sad boy. And the sad boy was ashamed of who he was embarrassed of who he was, and so he kept himself, tucked away. And what would happen was when that sad boy was triggered or someone would attack him, the protector would kick in. So then the anger would turn on and be like, go fuck yourself. And whatever else, you know what I mean? Sometimes I would verbally attack somebody. There were times when I was intoxicated in my early 20s where I physically attacked people. I'm not even going to lie about that. That happened. And it's surprised me because the anger being unmasked was shocking, but being able to cultivate the spaciousness within me to see my anger not as the devil reincarnated or as something bad just because the world doesn't like it, but as a unconscious development within my psyche to keep the wounds and the unprocessed emotions safe. Not because, and this is where when people talk about ego deaths and ego is the enemy, I really get deterred from that kind of language and conversation, because the anger is my ego created to keep parts of my psyche safe. But it wasn't from ill intent, and it wasn't from a place of bravado or I'm better than anybody, or it wasn't coming from macho masculinity ego. It was coming from, I love this part of myself, so let me keep that part of myself safe. And actually, this saying that just kind of opened up one last thing I want to share, which isn't really a wound or a emotion that I needed healing, but rather cultivating a level of self-compassion for myself has blown me away at every turn. Because man, it sometimes really is it is the medicine. Not sometimes, it is the medicine. Not waiting for somebody else to show me this compassion and seeing my own anger as while albeit unconscious, at times explosive, and for other people challenging, but for me, radical act of self-love. It was my mind's way of keeping me safe the only way it knew how. And that protector, that anger, is a 7-year-old boy who is keeping himself safe the only way he knows how. And even feeling this emotion that's coming up right now as I say it is surprising to me, because I didn't see this coming when I started to see this video. And I think I'm gonna start to wrap it up there, because this is the work, this is the magic, this is the medicine. Meeting yourself every step of the way. I'm so saying this for myself right now. Meeting yourself where you're at every turn, the good moments and the bad, because there's going to be a lot of both. So, all right, y'all, I'm gonna wrap it up there. Thank you so much for tuning into this video. I'll see you in the next one.